Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have all of you here today during World Cup in a Friday, and a day that Brazil has a game. So for us, it's a pleasure to receive here Svetlana Golovanova. She's a professor at National Research University High School of Economics in Novgorod, Russia. And she's already well known here. She collaborates with us, with GDEC, or a group, for some time. And Eduardo Pontual, that you know very well. I don't need to do another introduction. Well, they're going to present for us a paper that has just been published at Journal of Competition Law and Economics. And the name of the paper is Multi-Side Platform Analysis and Competition Law Enforcement Practice in BRICS countries. Well, I'm going to give the floor for them. And after they have their presentation, about 40 to 50 minutes, we're going to make some comments, and in the end, let's have a debate here with the public present at this, in this place. Okay, thank you. I give the floor for you.
So welcome everyone. I'll do some introductory remarks about the paper, and then I'll pass on to Svetlana to present and make comments. This is a joint work. It's actually started as a research collaboration with Higher School of Economics and Sokoko Research Institute in Moscow as preparation for the 2019 BRICS competition event in Moscow in 2019. So I had the pleasure to start working on digital markets and competition. Then this research evolved, and it became, we realized that one of the main issues was discussing relevant markets, how relevant markets are defined in digital platforms, and also how the competition authorities were adapting their tools to deal with platforms. So we have here a paper that does a review of articles, of cases up to 2020. We have an earlier paper that also deals with digital markets and antitrust at the Journal of Economic Surveys. It's a theoretical paper where we also do an analysis of quantitative tools that can be used for digital platforms and digital markets. We provide a summary of formulas for estimating SNP tests and also GUPI indicators, providing a comprehensive analysis that depends, as you will see, of how many markets you are considering in the digital platform and how network effects are taken into account. So we think that we have two companion papers. An earlier one is more a theoretical one with tools that can be used, quantitative tools, and we started then reading how does the platforms how the competition authorities go about doing analysis for such platforms. So I would like you to pass the floor here to Professor Golovanova. Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Well, multi-sided platforms is a hot topic these days, as the world's largest companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft are all platforms. And this raises a lot of concerns from regulators, and including antitrust concerns, as this business practice is quite different from traditional one, and it requires different approaches, as Eduardo already said. to analysis of this business practice. And it is actually not so easy for competition authorities, as theoretical background is very well developed and well known in academic society, while for policymakers it might be not so easy. I'm sure that everybody here is familiar with the concept of multi-sided platforms, so let me just give some comments on specific features of this business model. First of all, we should keep in mind that what companies do, what platforms do, they allow different types of users to communicate and transact through the interface developed by the platform. Passengers and taxi drivers communicate from Uber application. So hotels and travelers, advertisers and audience, buyers and sellers through Amazon, for example. So these are all examples of platforms, and it is important not to mix the provision of final goods and services and services provided by platforms, as platforms do not provide taxi services, for example. They provide a service of communication between taxi drivers and passengers. And competition authorities should distinguish between these two activities. These are absolutely different markets, and they require different economic tools of analysis. Eduardo mentioned that we have two papers. One paper is devoted to tools, but I do not plan to present it today. What I plan to present is actually experience of competition authorities. And I'm sure that Professor will have an opportunity to give some special seminar on tools. So the second comment. Actually the most important feature of multi-sided platforms is the presence of cross-site network effects. It means that the number of users on one side depends on the number of users on the other side. The more taxi drivers deal with Uber, the more attractive it is for passengers, for potential passengers, and vice versa. This affects business strategy of platforms a lot, as, for example, relative prices become very important. So there is a service provided to two groups of users. There is some total price for these two groups of users, which actually the platform gets for its services. But this price is divided between the two parts of platforms, between two types of users. And relative prices affect a lot final profits of the company, as charging too high price to the site with the highest elasticity of demand might be crucial, as decrease of demand on one side will result in decrease in demand on the other side. So in this case, so that would be a great mistake for platforms, and it is not exclusionary. Well, it's not an exception that platforms sometimes put zero price for some group of users, getting profit from the other. But it doesn't mean the total price is zero. It means that we should keep in mind, we should pay attention that there is another side of a platform, and it should be analyzed by competition authorities. Only two sides together, not the only one. Well, these cross-site network effects are, in most cases, they are positive. There are exceptions, but in most cases they are positive, and this initiates fast rise of platforms. So they rise fast, and it leads to the situation that it might be only one provider of the service of the market. So some dominant company, no competitors, of course, having some market power, it have a chance to abuse this market power. So antitrust concerns increase for sure. And that is why such companies are in the focus of analysis of competition authorities all over the world. So, actually all these features are very well known in academic societies. So there are models that are well described, this business model of multi-sided platforms. And our question was if it is known by policymaker, if it is applied in real competition policy enforcement. So mature jurisdictions seem to be more or less familiar with such concept, while situation with younger jurisdictions like BRICS competition authorities was not so clear. That is why we focused on the 5 countries, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So, and we collected database for these companies. But before I start talking about the database and results of our study, the results of case analysis, it is important to stress that platforms are not all the same. So there are different types of platforms. And this affects a lot the way, the approach to be applied by competition authorities in antitrust investigations. And we distinguish, following the academic literature, we distinguish between 3 types of platforms. Of course, we distinguish between transaction and not transaction ones, depending on observability of transactions between 2 sides of a platform for the platform. So, for example, Booking.com. There are hotels, there are travelers, they communicate, they transact through the platforms, and the platform observes this communication and results of this communication. So it knows the particular hotel, the particular room, the price of this room, and in this case, the platform is able to charge on per transaction basis. So this is an example of transaction market. This is, so one service, the service to transact through the platform is provided to 2 different groups of users. So the service is the only one. So it's one product, it's one market, but there are 2 different groups of users, so it's 2-sided market. 2 groups of users should be analyzed by authority. But the market itself can be measured in very traditional way by the number of transactions or volume of transactions. So we know the quantity, we know the price, so some aggregate information can be analyzed in a very traditional way, but we should not forget about the role of relative prices. Next. Non-transaction platforms are actually not homogeneous as well. There are 2 different situations. One situation is when two-side users try to find each other. They are interested in finding each other. Something like recruiting agency. So employers and employees get access to the same database. They try to find the best variants. They try to find CV or vacation which suits them. But after that, they need to meet. So they need to meet, they need to negotiate, discuss terms of their cooperation, and maybe after all this, they'll decide to sign a contract, or might not. So the result of communication is actually not observable to such type of platforms. So there are different types of recruiting agencies. So sometimes they observe this transaction, sometimes not. If not, we should say that it's a matching market. So 2 sides of platforms try to find matching, and the service provided by the platform is the service of opportunity to find matching. It's a service provided, the only service, again, the only service, but provided to two different groups of users. So we should say that it's only market with two different sides. And in this case, we cannot measure the size of this market in traditional way, as we do not observe the number of transactions. But we know the number of users on one side, we know the number of users on another side. We can find information about prices charged for these two groups of users to get access to the database. So relative prices should be known, relative quantities should be known, but it's another approach to analysis of this two-sided market. And the third situation is actually when only one side of platform tries to reach another. The classical and very well-known example is advertising. So advertisers are interested in getting access to audience, to provide information about their companies, about their products, about everything to the audience. While the audience in majority of cases is not very interested in seeing ads on websites or in newspapers or on TV, so it might even prefer not to see it. So the value of ads for audience might be actually negative. In this case, audience should be attracted by provision of some other goods and services, by context, by social networks, or by the service to match, to find matching, or to transact with some third party. So it can be multi-sided platform. So transaction market, for example, on one side, advertisers on the other side, and we can find a lot of examples looking at Google, for example, business model. But in this case, advertisers are provided with the service of getting access to audience, and the audience is provided with some other service, a context, for example, content. So products are different, markets are different, but we cannot discover them, we cannot investigate them separately, as the markets are connected through cross-site network effects. And again, in this case, approach to analysis, for example, SNP test becomes quite comprehensive, quite difficult tool for application, but it is possible. But if we forget about the existence of one site, we'll get absolutely wrong result. As we'll see that content is provided for free, so zero price, and what to do with this. But if we forget about advertisers. So, as you see, main characteristics of platforms should be discovered and they should be described at the very beginning of any antitrust investigations. They should be described on the level of market analysis. So what we did in our research, we collected a database from different countries, from BRICS countries. We collected cases, and we paid attention to the first stage of analysis only, to the stage of market definition, as we expected to find mentioning of multi-sidedness of the market and the presence of network effects. So we were interested to find out some signs that competition authorities recognize multi-sided platform nature of the business model. It was not so easy for us to collect this database, but it is great that one of us speaks Portuguese, so Brazilian cases were not a problem. I speak Russian, so for me it was easy to collect cases from Russia. India and South Africa, it's actually text in English, which is well known by both of us, and the problem was with China. As we do not speak this language, but you know, platforms help. Unfortunately, Google does not work in China, but there is a substitute Russian search engine, Yandex. So we just applied Yandex Translator. It works very well. So, for example, we put word Alibaba in English. We knew how the hieroglyph that corresponds to this word. We made a search of this hieroglyph through Chinese websites, so the sites of competition authorities. Then, after finding the text in Chinese, we used translation back to English. So it was quite funny work, but it was really research. And of course, different sources of information helped us a lot. So the first challenge was to make a list of cases, which was, again, it was more or less easy for all countries, but China. Well, so we used, of course, result of studies of other authors, some publications in academic literature. We also used, very useful for us was this source of data, Denta's China Monthly Antitrust Update. So it was it provides short descriptions of cases. So we knew what case to search, what text to search. So, after making the list of cases, we had to find the text of the decisions, and then we analyzed text of the decisions. It was a contextual analysis, so we read cases and analyzed them. It was not just an automatic search of some words or sentences. And what we finally got, unfortunately, the monitor is not big enough. So I'm not sure if you can see. So for each country, I'll provide a table. Let me stand, it is easier for me. So the table is always organized in the same way. In the left column, we see cases in which multi-sided platform concept had to be applied from our point of view, from our expert point of view, but was not. And here are cases in which multi-sidedness and or network effects were actually in the text. So, first of all, Brazilian Competition Authority, CADE, it is found the most fruitful, the most productive competition authority among the BRICS group in terms of the number of cases, as 25 antitrust cases against platforms and 8 merger cases were found for the last, I think, well, starting from 2009 to 2020, 11 years. Well, the period is from 10 to, well, about 10 years for all companies in our database. So, the earliest mentioning of the platform concept appears in 2008 or even maybe 2004, as later, after the publication of the paper, we were able to find one more case. So the first 2 cases here in the right column are against payment systems. So, and in these cases, CADE in 2009 recognizes platform nature of this business model. It recognizes sides of the platform, issuers and acquirers, car holders and trade centers. So platform nature was recognized at that time. Network effects were very well described at that time. So competition authority demonstrates familiarity with this concept that time. And looking at decisions of competition authority, we see the evolution of approach. For example, in 2008, in Google double-click merger case, there is no mentioning of platform theory at all, nothing. And the market, it was 2 years ago, was defined as, well, something related to advertising. That's all. The role of attraction of the audience was not considered at all. So no any words that some other products is to be provided. 1 year later, Microsoft Yahoo case. Again, there are some words about, I think there is some mentioning of, it was a word platform in the text, but this doesn't affect market definition at all. So, again, it didn't affect market definition, it didn't affect further analysis, so we classify it like, well, in the left column. And then, we have a Google case in 2013. So, here, two sides of the platform are very well described, and I mean advertisers and the audience. So, they are described, they are measured in some way, network effects are described, not measured. Well, quantitative analysis is absent in all cases. Only just an idea can be present. And in Google case 2020, the number of interrelated markets increases. So it's not only two like this, like in this case, there are many interrelated markets as it could be expected for audience providing type of multi-sided platform. In Russia, in my country, situation is different. Up to 2017, there is no any sign that Russian Competition Authority knows at least something about multi-sided platform concept. It was expected to be applied in 2015 in the case against Google, as it was absolutely the same case as the one just decided by European Commission. But in contrast to European Commission, Russian Competition Authority does not pay attention to the role of advertising. So it describes different markets, say no word about their interrelation, and no any word about the role of pre-installing of application to profits that the company gets from advertising. So, the first mentioning of some platform theory appears somewhere in between 2017-2019. It is not clear what was the particular year, because it's a case again on a merger of Uber and Russian company Yandex Taxi. I have already mentioned it. And in the text of Competition Authority decision, there is no any word about platform nature of this business model. No any word about network effects. No any word about need to match the two groups of users, drivers and passengers. But there is an interrelated document, which is named Market Analysis. And market analysis of services provided by Uber and Yandex. And in this document, we see a precise description, very detailed description of platform nature of this market, multi-sidedness, sides of the market, and even some words about network effects. But the nuance is that this document was posted on FAS website in 2019. So 2 years after the decision on the case. So maybe it was some, there were some restrictions related to confidential information. I don't know. So, but I remember the particular day when this decision appeared. And later, starting from 2018, multi-sided platforms become very hot topic in Russia. So a lot of publications appear on FAS website. The concept is introduced to the public, and we see there were 4 cases in which platform nature and the type of a market was identified correctly, and in 2 of 4 network effects are very well described. So it was 5 or even 3 years ago compared to Brazil, when the first case appeared in 2009 or even 2004. Next, India. So, and analysis of this tape is made for all countries. So what's here? Here, again, it's an interesting situation. The precise mentioning of multi-sided platform concept appears in 2011. It was a case against National Stock Exchange. So in the text we see, again, well, description that different types of users search for each other, that they contribute to each other, so there are descriptions of network effects. But during the next 7 years, there is no any case with application of platform theory. So it could be expected, but this theory was not applied till 2018. So the next case against platform with mentioning of the theory appears in 2018. And actually, again, we see evolution of the approach. There is a series of investigations in India against, in the sphere of e-commerce. Flipkart and Amazon are in the focus of such cases. We see there were 2 investigations in 2015 and 2016 that were antitrust cases on abuse of dominance against the platforms, but they didn't result in any infringement decision, as the market share was found to be very small, irrespective of market definition. So market was not defined at all. Then in 2017 and 18, again, 2 cases on mergers of Flipkart with some other companies. In these cases, they are named platforms, but this doesn't affect market definition, as online and offline sales are found just different ways of distribution of products. So it's not an idea of a platform. And then in 2018 and 2019, again, 2 cases appear, 2020, 2 cases against Flipkart appear, and in these cases, competition authority mentions the need to match buyers and sellers of products and describe network effects. So we see the evolution, and evolution 2018, while the first case was in 2011. So the concept was known, but was not well applied. We see the progress in 2018. Next, China. In China, situation is quite funny, maybe, as a private party affected by anti-competitive behavior may initiate judicial proceeding by themselves. They can do it by themselves, not asking competition authority, not complaining to competition authority. And there is a limited number of courts that can decide on such cases. We were able to find some of them. Of course, the level of economic analysis is extremely low when just private parties try to do something. So we didn't investigate such cases. We focused on the decisions of competition authority. And in 2012, 2016, this case is still under investigation, so we do not know actually in which column it appeared finally. So during 3 years there were 2 cases, but they are in the left column. It means that no application of platform theory. And in 2017, again, 17, 18, 5 years ago, 2 cases against the Chinese company Tencent were initiated. This is the company, a developer of multi-purpose media, messaging, and payment, I think payment application, WeChat, very well known. And in these cases, competition authority and courts of different level pay attention to particular services provided by the company, but they always stress interrelation between different types of users, between different types of services provided. So there is good understanding of platform theory. And in 2019, a Supreme People's Court of China published its judgment on the decision on antitrust case against Tencent. And in this judgment, we see very deep, very detailed discussion of what is platform, how sites are interrelated, what are difficulties related to market definition, what to do with zero prices. And by the way, in this judgment, the Supreme Court of China shows that zero price might be a great problem for example, SNP tests, so some other approaches are required. But he didn't know our paper. And South Africa. In South Africa, the main antitrust concerns of competition authority are related to activities of the company Naspers, which is an international holding with interests in publishing, retail sales, and investing in internet sector. And Media24 Limited, this company, is a print publishing division of Naspers. So you see that the two companies appear quite often. Again, what is interesting, the first mentioning of platform theory in 2007, and against these particular companies, this theory is applied in 2007, 2012, and 2017. We see cases in the right column. But at the same time, we see cases against the same companies, but without application of this theory in 2005, in 2016, and 2018. Which is interesting. So, not stable application of this business of this concept, but actually, in these cases, this concept was applied, but in indirect way. It was something like restriction of competition on regional market of newspapers, price dumping. And what competition authority did, it measured the size of the market and market shares of different newspapers by the profits from advertising. So not by the number of newspapers sold, but by the size of another, by the demand on the other side of the platform. We know newspapers are a classic example of platforms. So, again, there is some understanding of the concept. And what we see, the first year of application of platform theory in different countries. So, Brazil, India, and South Africa seem to be earlier users of the platform, while China and Russia seem to be late users. Anyway, in all countries we see some progress after 2018, and we really believe it is related to this, to the beginning of this cooperation between the countries, as in the BRICS group was organized in 2017, I think, but it started to work on some international research project in 2018, and we were able to join this project. It's a great honor for us, for sure. And we see the progress. As competition authorities started to compete in their understanding of this platform theory, and it increased the quality of decisions they made. Well, of course, it would be interesting to find out the reasons why some countries started to apply this concept early, while others started only after the BRICS forum. Because actually the theoretical background is the same in all countries. So the literature on the topic is very well known. Competition authorities communicate, they learn from each other. So European cases, US cases are published so anybody can read and try to apply the same approach, the same technique of analysis. Well, we tried to find explanation in institutional organization of competition law enforcement in these countries. Of course, 5 countries is a very small set, so we cannot pretend that it is really an explanation, but we used the classification of Gini on specific features of competition authorities by which they can be different. And what we found, there are 2 features that are systematically different between Russia and China on one side and the other 3 countries on the other side. The first difference is division, the presence of absence of divisions between investigative and decision-making bodies of competition authority. So this division can be made inside competition authority, or it can be 2 different competition authorities, 2 different organizations, like in South Africa, for example. While in Russia and in China, absolutely the same persons investigate a case and decide on the case. Of course, there is some communication with companies, there are some meetings, but actually there is no third party that controls the quality of decisions, that can ask, are you sure in your argument? I'm not satisfied with the data which is provided. I'm not satisfied with the evidence. So the existence of a third party motivates to provide more arguments, and of course companies are interested. Well, in case of Russia, companies and competition authority usually meet in court, and that is the level at which deeper economic analysis start to appear. And the second difference between the competition authorities is multifunctioning. Brazilian competition authority is focused on cases, on antitrust cases and merger cases. That's all, I think. In Russia, competition authority is responsible for tariffs, advertising, consumer protection, actually about everything. So procurement, so it's maybe the most multifunctioning agency in the world. In China, there are also some other responsibilities, including control of investment, advertising again, something like this. So in 3 countries, we see specialization. In 2 countries, which are Russia and China, we see multifunctioning. So this, again, might be some factor that restricts development of application of advanced theories in competition law enforcement. I think that is all I wanted to say. Just concluding comments. So I can only thank you for your attention. Our contacts are here on the slide. So, and we'll be glad to answer all your questions if you have any. Thank you.
So I would like just to close the paper presentation. As you see, we were not only curious to see how was the learning experience, but then if just giving ideas for more institutional-oriented scholars, that we were really surprised how different the authorities were. And so we tried to see whether we could link the institutional setting with this capacity of innovation. So in one sense, what we're seeing here is that a new kind of business model appeared. It started appearing very ubiquitous in very many sectors, and this posed the challenge for the competition authorities. They had to innovate as well. They had to learn and adapt And I'm certain that's something interesting, and it seems to be of interest of other scholars, is how can we relate this innovation capacity with the institutional settings. And in this sense, the paper also tries to make a dialogue with the institutional literature of organizations, and particularly public organizations, of how can you generate a more open entity, public administration, that's more open to innovation and adaptation of new concepts into their daily practice. We think we have some direction of we provided some thesis that could explain that, and I would like just to close to reinforce this, what was presented here, that there's an interesting line of research of comparative institutional organizations, and we just took one little piece of it and tried to associate with the capacity to innovate, to adapt to new challenges in a public organization. Okay, thank you. And please, your comments.
First, thank you very much for the paper. I think that's not only interesting, but very important to deal with the subject. But I would like to approach to this, give a little bit of my experience, because I was a commissioner in the CAD between 2003 to 2008, 2004 to 2008, June of 2004 to June of 2008. And actually, we have a case where the term of platform was a lot debate, was Sky and DirecTV merger. At that time, we do not know, there was no literature of platform. But you have to deal with some kind of subject that was completely new. First, the telecom market, the broadcast market, the data transfer market. Every this kind of market was completely separate. And when you analyze the case, they are all together, in fact, because there is a process of technological convergence, in the sense that it was the beginning of the use of the internet infrastructure, the cable, TV cable infrastructure for telecommunications. So these four markets, fixed lines, mobile market, data transfer, and pay TV, we began to debate about how to deal with that. So we organized at the time public audience. And for the first time, the idea of some kind, the word was not platform, but two-sided market, was at the time debate. And what is quite interesting in CAD's experience, of course, that I know better, is that CAD was historically very open for new approach to deal with this kind of things. So I guess when I read your paper that maybe the first formal approach to this kind of problem has happened here. It's just a curiosity, but just make this point. Other thing that this is a question that I'd like to hear from you. When you analyze not only measures, but as well some kind of penalties for conduct of very large multi-site companies. We traditionally find a lot of difficulty in cards. I personally have some doubt if it's possible actually operate, not the small one, but in the big tech cases, a country that is not the United States or European Union actually has sovereignty to control and impose strong restrictions in these large companies. And I imagine that the only way that countries that are not European Union and the United States can actually have some kind of influence in measures on this area or conduct on these areas, if there is some kind of coordination between third countries, such as BRICS or other kind of groups. So I'd like to hear from you, Svetlana. Do you see any kind of possibility to try to have some kind of debate on the institutional settling or the kinds of the style of decisions about antitrust between countries as different as Russia, China, Brazil, India, or do you think that this is going to be only an academic issue, but the public policy issues would take much longer to have some kind of coordination? Sorry for the...
I'm just Svetlana. Well, it is so that we see a lot of differences between countries in the way they apply competition law, in the way they interpret even the same norms of competition law, and the situation when companies become global and multi-sided. It's what we observe now is actually not multi-sided platforms. We observe ecosystems, which is extremely difficult to analyze even from academic point of view. And application of these comprehensive models and ideas for the purposes of competition law enforcement, well, it's actually the current challenge to competition authorities all over the world. But I still believe that right because of this, that these business models are not country-specific, they are international, and they are to be analyzed simultaneously by different competition authorities that communicate with each other, which learn from each other, that, well, maybe not on the level of investigation, but on the level of general principles, how to deal with such companies and how to control or regulate their activities. We can find some common approaches, and I believe that BRICS working group will be very helpful in this case. And actually there are a lot of examples that decisions on cases against the same companies, for example against Booking.com, there were a lot of decisions in different countries, so they considered the same business practice, they came to the same conclusions. Results were different. Results actually were different. I think, well, in some cases, I do not remember actually particular companies. I think the strongest restrictions were in Germany and in Russia. And in Russian competition authority cites the decision made in Germany, and that was the main argument for penalties and remedies imposed on on the activity of Booking.com in Russia. So I believe in it. I'd like to believe in it. We do not have other way, actually. Business becomes transnational. Transnational decisions are required.
So open for the...
Can I bring it up? Because I have a list of questions. Thank you. I don't know if you might want to take note, because I have like 10 questions. So, if you want, you can stop me at any time and we can discuss them afterwards. So I think it's a very, very interesting work, and I thank you for that. I mean, you managed to show the importance of cooperation. I think that's wonderful. However, I think at this moment, what we see and what you are also pointing out right now, it's mainly a convergence on the vocabulary rather than on the substantive analysis that these countries are doing. So I think it will be more challenging now to see if we manage to promote, a uniform or at least, compatible ways of analyzing these businesses. As you point out, for example, China, now they issued some guidelines on the platform economy, and they use the concepts, but they maintain everything extremely high level and, let's say, vague, that can be applied in very different ways. But so something that would be interesting is to show whether what was said in the BRICS report of 2019 was actually something that you find in the cases. Because there wasn't, for example, a lot of discussion about how you do the analysis. So that would be in line with what you found, that there are these concepts that are now floating, but this group, digital working group, did not provide, a formula for applying the analysis in this market. So maybe, what we could explore is, after this new report, if there will be more specific connection between the empirical data and what is in the report. Because I think in this one right now, I don't know, it would be interesting also to zoom in and look at all the specific elements that were highlighted in the report, if they are part of these cases. But this may be another research. Also, like in terms of multi-sidedness, it's considered for purposes of market definition. But one controversial issue is to what extent it is taken into account for the efficiencies or the defenses. So, the Amex case in the United States, it was all about that, saying that, that you generate efficiencies on the other side of the market, and that is basically sufficient. So the idea is like, what are the competition authorities doing in all these cases? Are they taking into account the two-sided nature also when it comes to defenses? Can you justify harm on one side by producing efficiencies on the other? I would be interested in knowing that, and I don't know if it's in your database. By the way, we would be also interested in if this database is accessible somewhere, like if you can share it. I would be very interested also for the purposes of the research on BRICS to understand what are these cases. Because I noticed that there are some cases, as you pointed out, there are some cases that might be missing that we might want to include if you want to be comprehensive. For example, there's a lot of cases on the financial markets in CADE where they connect, the payment issuer side with the card issuer with the card provider. Anyway, so that are very interesting also because they do not involve just two sides, but also three or more sides. And also I would be interested in that. So do you have cases that involve more than two sides? Also, this is another question that I would have. In CAGE, there are some cases that I was surprised not to see. Microsoft LinkedIn. There was a case of 2015, I think, but it was not in your list. Also, going back to the banking cases, you have Itaú XP and Itaú tickets, which are, I would say that they're part of this concept of platform. And if you look at the CADE report, they did a booklet on platform markets. I think that came out after you finished your research, right? And you did your empirical observations. Because there they have like 100 cases. So how does this, how can you explain that? Also, I would be interested in knowing if there is any substantial difference, at least when it comes to Brazil, after the new law of 2012, in 2012 entered into force, where we had more scrutiny for merger cases. Does this have any implications in terms of, or like, can you see some correlation with the increase of use of multi-sided platforms definitions? Because maybe prior to that, I don't know if we have many platform cases in unilateral conduct. I think that has a lot to do with the increase of merger cases also. Then another thing that I would be interested in understanding of this empirical exercise is whether the competition authorities, I think this was not part of your mapping, but maybe for future research, whether they actually quantify the network effects between the two groups. Because in some cases, for example, China, I think, in the new guidelines, they say that whether they define one or two markets, so whether it's matching or audience providing platform, depends on the strength of the cross-group network effects. But then, okay, do they actually measure the strength? I don't know. That would be an interesting thing to look at in this empirical exercise. Then I think more perhaps challenging questions, like going back to the first slides where you were defining the concepts. I never thought about it that way, that when it's a transactional two-sided market, it can be audience and matching, but when it's a non-transactional, it cannot be one-sided, the network effect, the direction of the network effects. So can you think about, for example, a market where the advertising is not measured? Now let me make an easier one. Netflix, I also did it in the conference last week. Netflix does not connect the two sides clearly, but it uses the data from the viewers to produce movies. So in that way, I think we could argue that it is in the interest of the viewers to have a lot of content providers, and also in the other side, it is interesting for the content provider to have a lot of users. In that case, like there is not observable transaction. Basically, it's a conceptual question. When you have a non-observable transaction, or when the network effects do not boil down to a transaction, can we still think about that division between audience and matching? So can there be basically a one-directional network effects? That would be my question. I know I'm kind of challenging your definition, but just to be a little bit provocative. And also another one to be provocative is, then what you think about the proposal by Belflam and the PEITS to say that you don't need to have a cross-site network effects to be a platform. It is enough if you manage the network effects between participants, and it doesn't have to be two-sided. Then finally, I conclude another. Sorry, I know you won't answer all these questions. We can discuss them separately. But an interesting issue to discuss is what it takes to become a platform. And now I connected to a specific case that was discussed in the European Union about Uber. The question was, can we call Uber a transportation service or is it just a platform? And the European Court of Justice responded that it is to be considered a transportation service because it is indispensable to match the two sides, and it has a direct, decisive influence over the terms of the transactions. So it determines how the prices are set. Then they had another case involving Airbnb, where they said, no, Airbnb is just an intermediary service, it's not an accommodation service provider, because it doesn't determine the prices and other conditions. They are much more hands-off. So they didn't analyze this from the perspective of economic theory, but I was wondering, is there some truth to that, some rationale that we can use in that sense? Also, when we analyze from an economic perspective, these intermediaries, that in some cases, you know, if they are very removed from the transaction, they should be analyzed one way, and if they are actively determining the prices and other conditions, then it should be a different type of analysis. That's it. Sorry.
I'm not a god who knows everything. Thank you for your questions. And thank you for being so interested in the topic. Well, let me try to answer at least some of them. Okay, the first question was about the results from the first BRICS competition authorities report on digital markets. Actually, I really believe that the main outcome was not the report itself. It was a motivation for competition authorities to start thinking in this direction. So some of them succeeded more, some of them less. Academic research didn't stop that time, so we continued to work on the topic, we continued to discover, and some new ideas will appear in the second report, in the third report. The question is about application of this knowledge by competition authorities. And as we saw 1 week ago, they are really interested in this communication, in common vocabulary, as you said. As it's really, so we need to have the same language to be able to communicate. But I believe that, again, economic theory provides us with the language. We know the concept, so we'll be able to apply it in more or less correct way. So I really believe that, well, actually in BRICS report, we didn't publish all our findings. Even our team who worked on the theoretical part devoted to this economic tools for market analysis. So our paper was published a year after the BRICS forum. So these materials were not included in the report while we started working on the topic that time. So, but I believe they will be helpful. Well, efficiencies. Well, it's really a big question, as, again, distinguishing between stages of economic analysis for some typical antitrust case. We analyze markets, then we analyze harm to competition, then we prove that harm to competition resulted in harm to consumers, so social welfare, so development of theory of harm. Then we develop, we keep in mind that there can be some benefits for consumers and social welfare, even from anti-competitive business practice. And we have another research, not this one. We have another research on efficiency analysis, so we tried. Again, for this time, only 4 or 5 BRICS countries were considered, but China, as it is extremely difficult to find the texts. But while we have quite a big database on cases, not only platforms, but all antitrust cases considered by BRICS competition authorities for the last 10-15 years. So what we did, we identified cases in which efficiency analysis is applied, and we can count them, even for traditional markets. So it is extremely difficult for traditional markets, while for platforms, it's another level of difficulty, because anti-competitive effects appear, it's the third level, they appear not on the market where the action is undertaken, but on related markets as well. But the same is true for efficiencies. So it's absolutely right and important questions, but I really do not know answer for it, as it is not clear for traditional markets as well. So more than 2 sites, yeah. Google, all cases against Google. So many different services provided by the company. They are all interrelated. The question is how to measure. Again, your next question, how to measure this network effects, cross-site network effects? Well, again, we developed some approach how to measure them. Well, they identified interrelated markets, I would say. They identified interrelated markets, and in some cases, they mentioned that, for example, profit from advertising depends on other markets as well. I think we did not meet any attempt to measure, to quantitatively measure this interrelation. It is difficult in theory. It is possible. It is possible. We know how to do it, but the key question is access to data. So we can try to do it. We have some ideas on the topic, but it will be an academic paper for sure. Well, competition authorities are not on that level of understanding yet. I believe that in some time they will come to understanding. But at least what they could do, even without knowledge of any formula, of corrected SNP test or hypothetical monopoly test, just keep in mind that, for example, 10% price increase leads to 5% quality decrease on this side. So in this case, it seems that it's hypothetically it's monopoly. So consumers do not have an opportunity to switch to other products. It's only if we consider one side of the market. But competition authorities should have in mind that there is some effect on the other side, maybe on the third side, maybe on the 10th side. So this 5% might show nothing actually. So it might be a substitution, as the resulting decrease in sales and decrease in profits might be much larger. So just keep in mind that ignoring other sides, we cannot apply SNP test. Just this understanding would be great, as we saw many cases in which this logic was actually one-sided logic was applied and resulted in infringement decision. May I just give one example? One example from Russian, well, as these cases are well known for me, we had a case against Google, or against Booking.com. And FAS tried to prove dominance on the market. So it identified it a platform, and the argument was that this set of services provided by Booking.com is not provided by any other company. This set of services simultaneously. And that resulted in very narrow market definition, and the share was found quite high. Pandemic, February, sanctions against Russia. Booking.com left Russian market, so it does not provide its services anymore on the territory of my country. Airbnb exit our market. Nothing changed. So if it were a dominant company on the market, we should be harmed by the exit. But there are a lot of substitutes. But competition authority deciding on the case came to the conclusion that it is dominant and there are no substitutions. But they exist. So it means that this test on hypothetical monopoly test was done in incorrect way. So it tried to interview users on both sides, hotels and travelers, and well, interpretation of answers was not correct. So, but it was something like 10 increase in prices of services would result in 5%. That is actually the example I provided. So just at least keep in mind. Eduardo, I'm afraid that questions about Brazilian cases to you. Netflix, I really do not know this business model. I'm not a specialist, but what you say seems that there are three sides. Advertisers versus matching market. Matching market, so producers of movies and audience. So audience is attracted by movies and advertisers are attracted by the audience. So it's not two-sided market, it's multi-sided market. So not to mix different services. That is a challenge, really. You?
Okay. So I'll take up from the questions that were not answered. Well, she mentioned about the BRICS report. An easy test would be just to go over the text and see which decisions have cited as a source of information. What's a platform? The BRICS report. And just for the audience, there are actually two BRICS reports that are being mentioned here. One that Nicola, I think, referred was the authorities report that was issued. And there's also the BRICS Center for Competition Law and Policy. They also provide a big, very exhaustive and complete report also on that. Here we're referring to the one by the authorities to see if they were using that as a text for themselves, as a source for themselves. About the list of cases, the tables are not exhaustive. Actually, if you go to the paper, we have about 10 pages of where we actually list every single case we could find. There may be some issues. I'm surprised why we didn't include Sky. Maybe we did. I can't remember. I have to check at the back. If we didn't...
only cases after 2008, except one case.
Yes. So we didn't.
In your paper you say
I may have limited the data sets. Yes.
Referees.
Okay. Yes, that one. So XP and Microsoft LinkedIn are in the list as well. So if you go to the appendix of our paper, you have the list of all cases we could find. Again, you have a much bigger list in the BRICS report because they refer to digital. We only were concerned about platforms. So that's also a restriction that we have and why it's different from the BRICS report. You may have something that deals with retail, digital retail. We did not consider because the company did not see itself. The case was not about a retail company becoming a platform, but actually it was referred to in the BRICS report because they had online sales. That was one of the main differences why their list is very different from ours. Not list, but... Yeah. Yes, then it becomes, then it's, yeah, they made that after our paper. Yes, it came later, and so they have more results. Do I think that the law, still talking about Brazil, do I think that the 2000 law influenced? Maybe yes, in the sense that being the same building, although the tribunal can have a very different opinion and may decide differently on cases. I mean, we had the Google case where you had I can't remember now if the SG said to file or to convict, but you had so many different opinions between the commissioners that certainly would trickle down, and it was easier to do that from in the same building instead of from between buildings from SDE to CAD and vice versa. I think it helped. But it's hard to distinguish that from just the fact that, well, after 2010, the business model became much more common and appeared. There are other cases. Well, let me see if I can. Network effects. Are they quantified? I think that I've read in many reports, or at least in some cases in Europe, if I recall, that discussing about quantifying the network effects is really, are there network effects relevant? Because that was your question. I don't think that authorities are going about running regressions. They're very hard to do. From all the cases there, I think only one you actually have data that estimated cross effects, which was because the central bank had the transaction data, and that they were able to, although it's a very early case, it's one of the few cases even in the world of you having econometric estimation of cross-network effects. It was a great job that the central bank did joint with SDE. But often what you have is they rely on company documents. Do company documents discuss network effects? Do they think it's relevant? Does it appear on their strategy? If it does, then they say it's relevant. They should be taken into account. Let's think that as a two-sided market or a platform. If I recall that's one of the measures that they have. More than just asking the companies, asking competitors, do you consider network effect on your business model? They actually go about and say, no, the firm documents say that. Of course, it's a style of investigation where such documents are provided to the authority. Depends on the country, but it may be useful in other countries as well. Transaction on transaction and efficiencies. I may make a joke that, well, you shouldn't leave to a platform debate without it. To paraphrase the Amex case. And also Piet's Belflum, did I get it? Yeah. Of suggestion that the default should be two-sided markets instead of one, but I think that was more or less influenced by how the courts in US act. They had to think that the harm and the benefits, they must be measured on the same market, and then once they were put together, the markets, considering just a transaction, the efficiency became much more bigger or relevant than you would see that analysis in other markets. I'm trying to recall, but I think that in Brazil you would see CADE not using a single market, but even if it did, I'm sorry, no. Yes, if I recall, the max issue was that by considering a single market instead of two, the efficiencies had much more weight than in other jurisdictions. But I would say that other jurisdictions, even if you use two separate markets because they are interrelated, those efficiencies could be used as well to weight on the outcome. So I don't think that considering two separate markets would make much of a difference when considering efficiencies, because they would try to argue that the other market, although not directly affected by the business practice, the network effects are so strong that you had to consider both. On some of the cases, for example, a good example, the InfoGlobal case in Brazil. they were two separate markets. And harm was actually perceived on the other market. And that was led to the conclusion. So there's two separate markets, advertising. The practice was on the advertising side. InfoGlobal were asking for exclusivity dealing. But the analysis and the harm and what led to this agreement was the harm on the other market of subscriptions and readership. That were the harm. So that's a good example that even if you, for example, here in Brazil, you had a case where there were two separate markets, nevertheless, it didn't stop from either efficiencies or harm being analyzed jointly on both sides. But that's certainly a big issue that it doesn't stop. You have much more questions. When network effects are not that strong, should we still provide this discussion? It's a very good discussion. We can continue. I have my opinion. Maybe Svetlana had ours. And we should do another debate on that because it's big. I mean, even if you go to the just for last comments, even if you go to the internet, should you take a platform business model? There are many. If you go to the internet, just type that. Should I be a platform? So you have consultants suggesting, should you take? Marketplace. More than platform, a marketplace, which is a type of platform. Should I just be a reseller, or become a platform as a marketplace? And it's interesting that they do discuss consultants for small business people, or if you want, network effects. That's really what makes it. First, you must be big enough for people who wanted to join your network, and that's what then you make sense for you to switch into the not reseller, but to the marketplace business model. Yes, network effects I think are always very important, and then maybe suggest that this is one of the main characteristics for you to consider platforms or not. But yes, we should continue this discussion because even that analysis that you said about the European, I was not aware that distinguishing service providers by platform itself. I would put my 2 cents for the next. Okay, just by fixing the commission, you manage the prices. So just the fact that the heart of the price is the commission itself. Whether they do it by dollars, which is what Uber does, or by percentage, I think it's secondary by the fact that you may have market power to influence the size of the market by providing the net result. But that's certainly a good discussion for our next meeting of the Rio people in Rio that work with antitrust. So.
I think that you have time for some question yet. Give the floor for the other people here. Jandra, Marcos, Pondé, some question? No. I don't know if you know, Svetlana, now there is a debate in Brazil, relationship to a law, to regulation, big techs, and digital platforms. I think that a very interesting issue that you have to deal from now on in competition is the relationship between competition in this kind of business and public policies. Because you analyze particularly the BRICS countries, the institutional environment is quite different between China, Russia, Brazil, India, and so on. So a big challenge is what kind of approach you have to deal with the antitrust questions, considering the objectives or public policy of each country to this kind of companies. You have just told that I think that's very interesting, a kind of experience that depends on the situation now in Russia, that some companies has go out or close the business, at least for some times. What effects this have on the market? When you think about China, there is restrictions of some foreign business for political reasons, doesn't matter. But anyway, this has antitrust consequences for China. And I would like to hear a little bit from you how you think this relationship between antitrust and public policy in relationship to experience in Russia. How, what kind of debate there is in Russian relationship to antitrust, consider the public objective of companies there, because when you analyze each area, it seems to me from outside that in Russia the antitrust authority has a much larger authority, and that is much beyond the antitrust. How this deal with the antitrust debate there? I mean that there is consideration beyond antitrust when have decisions in relationship to measures or conduct in Russia, or the decision of antitrust authorities are only based in the traditional analysis, yes, consumer welfare, or preference for companies to operate in domestic market. The relationship between public policy and antitrust. This is important in China, this is important in Brazil in different ways, because you have a regulation. This law is going to affect the analysis of antitrust. There's no alternatives, because we're going to establish some lines what you can do, what you cannot do.
So, thank you for the question. First of all, the legal norms, the competition law on the book, is the same across countries. So, from normative point of view, Russia is not different from others. Russian competition authority is really, it is very powerful, it is very influential, but it is independent. It is independent from the policy in that sense that you mean. Well, but of course, situation in country due to different circumstances affects priorities of competition authority. For example, not the current situation, but pandemic. Well, I think it's since the Soviet time that the general vision of main targets of competition policy. We didn't have this competition policy during Soviet time, but it was that time it was important to protect consumers. Prices should not rise too fast. All goods had to be available. So these days it seems that antitrust is used for consumer protection as well. And with time, so in the very beginning, well, it was more or less market type, but with time, for example, Russian anti-competition policy moves in the direction of regulation. So we have a lot of cases. They are not related to the current situation. We have a lot of cases which are illegal according to Russian competition law, but they would never be considered antitrust abroad. It's something like when companies do not follow regulation. Natural monopolies do not follow regulation, or harm to a counterparty without restriction of competition. This is considered by Russian Competition Authority. And given that quite often there are no specialized authorities in the sphere of industry regulation, Russian Competition Authority takes this role. And sometimes it uses antitrust in order to reach other targets. So, but I would not say that something changes with the recent situation. So, and what I saw a week ago is really that Russian Competition Authority is focused on cooperation and is interested in cooperation. And it tries to apply approaches which are well known all over the world. And this target is not, it didn't change its target during the last year, if that is what you asked me about.
It's very near to 2 o'clock, or 1 o'clock, 5 minutes to 1 o'clock. You had 2 hours for this debate. I thank you a lot, Svetlana, for your presentation. Of course, Eduardo is he's in his home, but for us it's a pleasure to have you here, debate with us, and I hope that we can make this other opportunity not only with you, with some of your colleagues, because all the subjects is very rich. And you have a lot of subjects that we could not deal now, and you can do in other opportunities. So thank you very much. Let's finish now.